Orange County. And for other great performances, you could always, like or comment or subscribe to our social media channels. And that is my very, very horrible plug shortly before we bring on probably the only reason anybody's watching tonight, and that is to talk to the man himself, head coach for Orange County, Danny Stone. Danny, welcome back to the Orange Black Soccercast.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Hope you guys are all doing well.
I don't want to speak for everybody, but if I have to, riding a nice high after Saturday night. I hope you are as well.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, we're pleased with the result, and very very happy to approach this week's training and obviously a bye week this weekend with a good result from Saturday. I think a very tough place to go and play, especially a team who we know have done very well so far this season. I think at this time of year, it was the weather was not easy, and it's never an easy place to go and play, particularly against a team who are performing well right now. So we're very pleased overall with of course what we came away with.
Danny, maybe without giving away any trade secrets, how did you prepare the team? Because it really seemed like, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, Orange County just pulled the El Paso defense out of position consistently and then exploited that. If you can, how did you set the team up for Saturday night?
Well, I think we knew that El Paso had been a team who've scored a lot of goals this season. We knew that they particularly were dangerous in, I think, transition moments and counter-attacking situations. And from watching them in their previous games, they play in a way where they perhaps risk a little bit defensively with, keeping their front three very much ahead of the ball quite often. And so we knew that was going to be something that perhaps on occasion we could exploit, but at the same time that's a dangerous aspect for them. And as I said, they've scored a lot of goals in transition and shown a lot of quality, and they are a good group of players with good technicians and players who are very clever in terms of combination. And up front they have a couple of wingers who are probably less vertical in style, but very much comfortable in moving inside and dribbling at a back line and combining, like I say, in the tighter spaces. And they've been very successful with this. And I think for us, we overall wanted to make sure that we put in a very solid defensive performance. And of course, we were putting ourselves under appropriate pressure to go and get the first away victory and result of the season. And along with that, we hoped the first clean sheet of the season. And of course, those two things was something that we were able to achieve. So we were happy with that. But we knew that was going to be a very important aspect to this away performance, as it is with any away game. But I think particularly, again, against a team who have been performing well, who have had a lot of good results. And I think teams have found it very difficult going to play in El Paso this year. And, so even more so, I was really pleased with the display, particularly defensively, that the team were able to produce on Saturday.
I appreciate you mentioning that defensively. It seemed like the second half was understandably a little more pragmatic than the first. Was getting a clean sheet key to Saturday night for the team, or was it just going to be an added bonus to the result?
Well, look, I think it is a key. Yes, I mean it's a key in terms of obviously getting a result. Clean sheets. I mean, of course, you keep a clean sheet and you can't lose the game. But I think in terms of not just winning the game, but winning it with a clean sheet. These were two big targets, like I said, for us. So I think achieving both of those things was a great way to come away from El Paso. And I think of course, we'd have been happy with a victory, however that came. But I think particularly, with the added value of keeping that clean sheet, that was a target for us. And so to be able to say we achieved both of those goals that we set for this performance was I believe, important for the group. Yes, absolutely.
Got it. And then bigger picture right now as we head towards the halfway point and not quite there, admittedly. 12, and just looking at the league here, 12 matches played, 16 points, 5 wins, 1 draw, 6 losses. I'm going to ask you one simple question here. Is this the way that you envisioned it going to start 2025?
I mean, of course, in an ideal world, we'd like to be on more points. We'd like to have won more games. I think in the reality of USL seasons, it's very hard to predict what the season looks like in the first, I think, 10 or 12 games, especially. These are, I think this year you can see that the parity amongst teams is very close, especially I think in the West. And I think we've probably mentioned that a couple of times, but it's a league this year where every single game is a tough game, and every team that you play has good players. They're a good team, and I believe for the most part that everybody on their day playing well has a chance to win the game that they're playing. And I think that's probably fairly true across the board. You can probably look at some standings and pick a couple of teams who you feel are strong and will remain strong through the season in terms of consistency. But I do think that everybody has quality and everybody has a good team that they can put out on the field. And we are one of those teams, but every team that we play also puts a test in front of us. So I suppose to answer your question, Dylan, you know it's not the exact way that in an ideal world we hope that things would go. But I think on the other hand, if I look at things more recently, I've not been displeased with a lot of the overall performances more recently, and I'm talking really in the last sort of 5 or 6 games here. Some of the results I think haven't gone our way in games where I feel we've perhaps actually deserved a lot more than we got, and probably honestly games where certainly in possession we've performed I think better maybe than we performed on Saturday. But I think the difference on Saturday was, of course, the clinical nature in terms of scoring the 3 goals in that 10-12 minute spell right before half time, and taking chances that we created, because I think we're a team who maybe haven't struggled to create chances through the season. We just haven't rewarded ourselves often enough for those chances that we've created. And then, of course, on the opposite side of the ball, it's too long before we were able to keep the clean sheet that we did this weekend. And you put both of those things together, and the final result, of course, has a reflection of that. But as I said, I think there's plenty of games actually that I've not been unhappy with the overall performance and felt that we certainly played well enough and created enough, and actually also honestly limited the opponent to relatively few and not too many clear-cut scoring opportunities, but still conceded too many goals in those moments that we did face. And there's a few reasons I think behind that, which I don't need to necessarily go into right now. But my point being, we've won 2 out of the last 3 league games, so I'm pleased with that. I think with the result away in El Paso this weekend, we, like I said, go into the bye week feeling like we've achieved a couple of targets that we set ourselves, and now we have 2 weeks to work again and to remain healthy and to go into the next game against Sacramento in the Jägermeister Cup and continue some momentum, we hope. And again, we're looking forward to be back at home in a couple of weeks, and it feels like a little while since we've played at home, and we'll be excited for that one. And again, I think that's a long way of answering your question to say not exactly the way I'd envisioned it completely, but I feel actually there's probably a lot more general positives than some of the results have reflected. And so I certainly move forwards here with a lot of confidence and a lot of positivity and absolute belief in the group that we have.
Well, I appreciate the depth of the answer. For those of you watching live, if you want to ask Coach Stone a question, now would be the time to drop them into the chat, while DK here has some more questions.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us once again, Coach Stone. We love having you here. You already kind of touched up on how hard it is to win in El Paso, and especially in Orange County history. I don't have the numbers. Our statistician Nathan would have more of those numbers exactly, but we haven't had the best luck in our history of winning in El Paso. So coming off of that victory, first away victory of the season and first shutout, what are some of the things that you take away and the squad takes away from that as the biggest strengths that you want to move forward with, as well as maybe some areas that you want to continue working on in these next couple weeks?
I think the key to this game and this eventual result was to be very resolute and have a defensive strength about us, and a grit in the performance defensively. I felt that was, I think it's like you rightly said. I think when the score is 3-0 at half time, second half means we don't have to open ourselves up particularly in that second half. And I think we probably rode 10 minutes or so at the beginning of the second half where, we were adjusting a little bit to a couple of changes that El Paso made. I think they had probably the one opportunity in the game came in that earlier part of the second half. And I felt once we'd sort of seen out that initial 15, 20 minutes of the second half, then we looked, I felt, albeit not having possession of the ball particularly, but I felt we worked very hard. We limited opportunities. We certainly limited, I thought, El Paso to shooting from distance and didn't grant them clear-cut opportunities. And, I think defensively put in a lot of hard work in, again, tough conditions in on the day there in El Paso, hotter than it was in Phoenix the previous week. And, that was not an easy task for the players. And I felt that every man that participated in the game, whether they played minutes or gave their energy from the bench supporting the group, it took everybody's energy and effort to contribute to that result. And this is something that I think we take forwards with us to say, look, we have proof behind us here now that we are capable of being a resolute, gritty, tough defensive team when we need to be. And I think we can probably, we can improve in terms of what we do with the ball from this game. I felt like I mentioned earlier, we probably have played previous games where we've been more fluid and we've probably created more with the ball. But in this game, away from home, there is no getting away from the fact that you have to be tough to beat. And if you want away results, if you want to get points on the road, that's a style of performance that you have to show, and that's the type of personality that I need from the players and from the team to continue to get a result away from home. And I felt that was something we showed, and the most pleasing part of that result was, I think, this aspect which now we have to continue and stay consistent with.
Yeah, no, definitely. And maybe a tough question, maybe not. But as far as like you personally, at the helm, and maybe just for the squad in general, what do you think now that we're kind of talking to you almost midway through the season? What's been some of the biggest challenges for you this season? Now that this is your first, full season with Orange County and with a roster.
Yeah, I think what we've probably struggled with most through the season so far, and particularly probably until maybe a month or so ago, was really consistency of availability of some players from injury, and therefore being able to, I think, have some consistent rhythm on the field. And I think for example, Tristan Traeger was not healthy until 6 weeks or so ago, and then unfortunately, I think he was coming back into actually finding some rhythm, finding full fitness, and feeling some some flow in the way that he was playing. I felt the game he played against Colorado Springs in that victory, that was, I think, probably the first time where I've looked at him on the field and said, right, I feel like he's finding himself again there. But that's, we're talking, I don't know how many weeks, but probably, 15, 18 weeks really before we're really fully seeing that side of thing. And then unfortunately now he's picked up an injury, and we hope he recovers quickly. And then we've had some similar situations with Ethan Zubak as well. And these are two key centre forwards for us. And I think, it goes without saying that if you're missing your two key centre forwards probably in your group, it's going to be something that is more difficult for you. And Ethan had an unfortunate injury with the contact and the contusion he had on his foot from the end of the Sacramento game, which kept him out for 5 or 6 weeks. And then unfortunately, quickly coming back from that, just had a bit of groin tightness, which wasn't a long-term thing. But again, you can see from Saturday how important it is to have an Ethan Zubak, a Tristan Traeger, as potentially an option in the group as a number 9. Because the reality is, as we see on Saturday, games are won and lost by scoring goals at one end and stopping goals at the other. And, everything that goes on in between and around that is a massively important part of the game. But in both boxes is where you're eventually going to win or lose. And like I said, I was very, very pleased with how we defended our box on Saturday. And of course, we rewarded ourselves for 3 good opportunities that we created towards the end of the first half. And honestly, we probably, I would say, actually had the next best chance of the game in the final minute with a counter-attacking situation that unfortunately Pedro just can't quite get his foot on the end of. But look, again, this was a performance where we probably showed a couple of aspects that we hadn't quite shown in both boxes as often as we could and should have previously. But we remain, a team that, like I say, I feel is in a good place in general. Plenty of room for improvement. Don't get me wrong, and plenty of aspects that we have more future targets that we set ourselves as a team that we want to achieve, and these are ways of us getting better and earning more points as we move through the season here. But like I said, I feel we're actually some quite small margins away from achieving much better results, and so this is why I don't feel negative at all in any way. And I fully believe in the group that we have, and it's nice, like I said, to be able to go into a bye weekend, which comes around after a victory. That's a much nicer way to go into that, and you feel better about the time that you have then to prepare for the next game versus a result that doesn't go your way. So we're working hard, and we think we are not far away from, I think, much more consistency in some of these results.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fantastic to hear, especially from you. I think fans in general are still very hopeful because we see that talent, on the pitch. We trust you at the helm for sure, talking to a lot of fans. But it's been a roller coaster so far. And I think, one of those elements has been, of course, injuries that we've all, seen and felt and have been disappointed in, especially with, Grayson Duty being out for the rest of the season. That was a huge blow, I know, to you guys, to us as fans, with Traeger being out as well. And, hopefully everybody stays healthy from there. But is there any kind of plan, and not that you can really answer this for sure, but is there any plan to kind of strengthen the squad further in this summer window? Or is the focus really just about getting the squad healthy and, finding that chemistry and pushing them forward?
I think the initial is always the day to day, and the players that we have here and the team that we have here, we will work hard with them. I think I've been very impressed with how the group have worked and trained over the last 6 or 7 weeks, particularly. I feel we took a step forwards in some of the training work and some of the culture and the habits on the training field, which again is something that does take a little bit of time at the beginning of a season as teams gel together. But the training environment is very important. So the first answer to your question is, first and foremost, effort and energy and focus goes into working with the players and the team that we have at our disposal here, and we believe in this group, and we have good players here that we work with. I think at the same time, I think every team in the league right now is also looking at always areas that they can improve as the season goes. So, I mean, without having specifics for you, I think it's always something that every coach and every team is looking at their roster and looking at their squad. And of course, now you get 10, 12 games in, you have a good feel, I think, for sort of where you feel you have strength, where you feel you might need improvement, where you can add to the squad. So of course, everybody is looking at that same situation, I think. And but for me, that's something that if we bring players in, we begin working with those players when they arrive. But right now, my focus is today's training session and tomorrow's training session with the group that we have here, and having a little bit of rest time this week for some who have put in a good shift over the last few weeks, especially with two difficult away games. And we'll recover a couple of bodies, and we have the nice luxury, I think, now this week of just being able to have a slightly calmer week without a game on the Saturday, and then, like I say, we build it up again to Sacramento next weekend.
Yeah, and that kind of perfectly sets up my next question, just in general, of when you do have a bye week, especially coming off of a really big win, not just a win, but obviously the first one on the road and the first shutout of the season, like we've mentioned multiple times before. But how do you guys keep the momentum, going into the next match, which is also going to be a cup match?
Yeah.
And then continue that into the league when you do have a bye week? Like, is this a time for more of rest and relaxation to, recover from the season that we've gone through so far? Or is this a time where you try to push forward on that momentum and train kind of extra hard? Or, of course, and I'm sure the answer is more of a mix of both.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, the answer absolutely is a mix of both of those things because they're both important. Honestly, it's I think initially it's some rest, some recovery. That doesn't mean we're not training. It doesn't mean we're not working. But I think it's a slightly different week this week in terms of not preparing for a Saturday match. So we do have, like I say, that we'll look at it as an advantage of saying, look, we can tailor the week physically as we need to. We can make sure that players, if they need a little more recovery time, it's a good week to do that. But at the same time, we don't stop training. We don't stop working. We keep pushing, and there'll be an appropriate amount of load through this week, and then we'll allow the players some time, just as much mentally, to have a little bit of downtime when we do have these weekends without a match. But that doesn't come at the expense of obviously being in a good place to start again next week and to push hard towards Sacramento. So I mean, yeah, listen, you answered the question for me. Really, it's a combination of both of those things, but for the reason that they are both very important. So it's a long season, the USL season, and it's there's a lot of elements to it that are tough physically, tough mentally, and it's important, I think, when you do get these opportunities to take those and to give people some freshness and some recovery in the mind as well as the body when we do come back to push. And this is something I believe in heavily as a coach, is when we ask players to push, I want them to be in as fresh a place as possible to be able to do that. And so this is a good week for us to balance those two factors for sure.
Danny, the club is obviously gone for the next 11 days, so to say, most of the way through June at this point. What would you like to see, or what do you need from the fans for the remainder of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is simply probably to repeat what I've said a few times, is when we play at home at Championship Stadium, we feel the energy of the fans. And as I know this as a player, I certainly know this as a coach, you reciprocate energy. And the first job is for us to give the fans something to get behind, and to give the fans, moments in the games where it's exciting and where we give them, something to cheer and to support. But players feel this energy, and so the biggest thing it's a word probably I use more than anything else in my work with teams is energy. And players hear me say this all the time. Your energy is so important. The energy that you give, not just for yourself, but for your teammates, is important. And this is no different when we're creating an environment in the stadium. It's like I said, it's a reciprocal thing where every bit of energy, every bit of noise, every bit of support that the fans can give players is felt, and it's reciprocated, and it's a really important part. And it works both ways, like I said, but it's recognised, I think, is a good message. It's certainly recognised, and it's very, very important for the players, because the reality is every player that we have, every member of staff that we have, we want to go out there and do as well as we possibly can for Orange County Soccer Club and for the fans that support us. There's no day where we go out training, and there's certainly no match day where we arrive and we don't want to go and win a game and put on performance that everybody deserves. So the knowledge behind that is that everybody is putting in everything they can to be successful. And I think if the fans hear that and then they recognise that in the performances, then I think they have something to get behind. And this is key for us. So it's they're a hugely important part of why we do this. And like I said a couple of times, that is my biggest message, is to please stay behind the team and let us hear you and give your energy, and we will do everything we can to give it straight back to you.
Thank you, Danny. One final question. We presume you've got a day off. How are you going to spend it?
If I'm honest with you, I haven't quite decided on that yet. So I don't know. It's sometimes when I have these days off, I almost deliberately don't plan and schedule too much, because the rest of my week and my life tends to be fairly scheduled. So sometimes on the days off, it's nice not to have too much planned and not too much scheduled on the books as such. So that's where I stand right now. But any suggestions, I'm all ears. Believe me, I think there's still a lot of Orange County that I haven't probably explored yet. So any suggestions and any advice would be welcomed, definitely.
Say, grab yourself a hat, some sunscreen, sit down on the beach, and just
yeah, definitely a hat.
Have some Malort.
No, maybe not. Maybe not some more. We can save that for us, I think. Ladies and gentlemen, your coach for Orange County Soccer Club, Danny Stone. Danny, thank you again.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having me.
much.
Yeah, no problem. Pleasure. Thank you, guys.